For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chad Stenzel. I'm the CEO of Sandler Training, Hampton Roads. And I'm coming to you from an empty training room, a training room that has been empty since about March 13th. And if you're anything like me, leading up to that date, even as we started to hear more and more about COVID-19 and coronavirus and all these things, in my mind, just this is the entrepreneur in me, I suppose, but in my mind, as that was sort of bubbling up in the week or two prior, my thought was, hey, we're going to have hand sanitizer on the desks, we're going to wash our hands, and we're going to keep going, like we always do. And no idea, no intention of closing any part of my business down. Well, on March 13th, I think, is about the day when Governor Northam came out and said, we're shutting down the schools. And I knew that presented a challenge for me because a lot of the people who come to my training have, school-age kids. And so once the schools were shut down, I said, oh my, I think I'm going to have to maybe pivot a bit here. And we'll talk about pivoting throughout the course of this hour. But that was the aha moment for me. Schools were shut down. I thought, okay, I'm going to have to probably switch to more of a virtual platform for my local training. Now, the good news for me was I was probably already doing 40% of my training via Zoom prior to this. I work with a lot of companies that have diverse sales teams spread out all over North America. And so we were already doing a number of trainings virtually. However, our core business, our core audience was, local companies sending people in. And so they weren't as used to, having to get on Zoom to watch training. They like the synergy of being in the room with other people and, pinging ideas and thoughts off of them. That's easier to do in person than via Zoom. And so, as that happened to me, I'll never forget that next day, which was a Saturday. And this was when it was all sort of really becoming real, right? For me, maybe for you too. But I'm watching the news, and I spent probably way too much time tuned into the news that day. And of course, there was none of it was good. In fact, it was dire, right? This was at the time where, people were, loading up moving trucks full of toilet paper and hand sanitizer, right? And then they were trying to resell it for $300 a bottle or something ridiculous. And on top of that, you're hearing, minimum 1 million people, we can expect to be, it was one horrible thing after another. And the more I thought about that, I started to think, I think I need to do something a little differently here than just switch to virtual. And so that Saturday, I began reaching out to authors and CEOs and speakers that I knew in the personal development, professional development world, the business world. And I said, hey, I've got this regular Tuesday morning class that I'm doing. And I think, based on what I'm seeing and I'm hearing and reading, I think we need to do something a little special. Would you mind coming on and spending maybe 10 or 15 minutes talking to my folks, giving them some encouragement, some positivity, some ideas and action items. And I was overwhelmed as I started to reach out. The responses that I got from these folks, these people who I looked up to, names like Tom Ziegler and Andy Andrews and Bob Berg, Mark Victor Hansen, who wrote the Chicken Soup for the Soul series, Carly Fiorina. I start reaching out to these people. They're saying, yeah, Chad, we'd like to come and talk. And so then from that point, I expanded and I said, well, man, I normally have 15, 20 people maybe in the office. I probably ought to reach a little further than that. So with about with about 16 hours notice that first week, I started just sending out over LinkedIn. And a couple other things said, hey, I've got this class tomorrow. You're going to hear from 4 or 5 speakers. We're going to talk about how do we thrive through these sort of uncertain times. And 16 hours of lead time, we ended up with 400 people live on that first session, 400 from at least 10 different countries. And it spun into a series off of that. And, we ended up that first session being watched by 2,500 people on replay. And what it told me was, there's opportunity in the midst of what we're going through right now, right? So there is opportunity for us to reach more people than ever before in different ways than ever before, but we've got to be willing to pivot to make some of those changes. And so that's just a, I wanted to start with just that flavor of sort of how this impacted me. And I will tell you that the first 2 months of this COVID, I've been busier than I've probably been in 4 or 5 years. Helping people, right? Bringing clarity to clients, trying to give some ideas and clarity to prospects even on what they were doing. And I know a lot of you are doing that same thing. But it's been really an interesting time for me. And so I was thrilled when John reached out and asked about doing one of these series of webinars. I jumped on it right away and I said, absolutely, I'm in. I'd be happy to share. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and go into share screen mode. That's one of the casualties of this environment is, a lot of the person-to-person stuff that we would normally get to. Let me just close out my email there and find my presentation. The person-to-person stuff gets lost. However, we've got to keep it visual to some degree. And so doing a lot more PowerPoint than I would typically do. But I hope this will be helpful. So the title of the talk is Thriving Forward, because I really believe for every one of you on here right now, there's opportunity to thrive. And I know some of you joined late, so let me just very quickly, again, my name is Chad Stenzel. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the CEO of Sandler Training, Hampton Roads. We do leadership, management, sales training right here locally. I've got clients, of course, a lot of them here. We've also got clients in other states, and I've worked with companies that are even based in other countries. But the core of our business is entrepreneurs, business owners, leaders right here in the Hampton Roads area. And so I'm just going to open up again and mention one more time the chat. If you've got a question, you can drop it in the Q&A, but you can also leave comments and questions in the chat panel. The best way to participate throughout this, one is open your own chat box. And if you want to just say hello, say, hey, would love to hear from you. That kind of helps me know that you can hear me at least. Use the Q&A for questions, share takeaways, lessons, and participate. So I will tell you this, to get the most out of this session, what I've done is I've taken a series of four sessions that I created for business owners that we've been walking people through. And I tried to boil them down into about an hour. Well, you can imagine there was a lot of cutting away, but probably not as much as I should have. So 2 things about that. Number one is I'll probably go more quickly than I would normally like to go. But along with that, as I already mentioned, they're recording the session, so you'll be able to watch it back. And also, and this is going to be on you as the participant, if you're interested in my deck, which contains, I think, 70 or so questions that we should be asking ourselves, our clients, our employees, our prospects. If you want that deck, the entire deck I'm going to use, I will email that to you, but you've got to email me. It's chad.stenzel@sandler.com. I'd prefer not to send it out en masse because I want to make sure it's only going to people who participated and really are interested in the material. So if you will email me, chad.stenzel@sandler.com, at some point today, once this is over, I will email you the entire deck. But to that end, a lot of questions. I do want you to take some time on this session to think through some of these things and really determine, hey, where are we right now? Where am I right now as a leader? Where are my people who are helping me develop business right now? Where are their heads at? What are they doing? So definitely take some time for reflection today. But if you miss a piece or if I go too quickly at some point, know that you can have the deck if you ask for it, and you certainly have access to the recording. Here's the final thing. You've got to make a decision to change, right? Whatever you're doing, and that doesn't mean that I'm saying what you're doing now is not working, because you might be like, some of my clients right now are killing it, but there's still things they've got to change and tweak, right? There's still things we've got to look forward. And in fact, the material that I'm delivering now is very different from what it was 6 or 8 weeks ago, right? So I'm sort of assuming in this that you've gotten past the shock and awe piece. And if you haven't, this may be your wake-up call, but a lot of us are now looking towards, okay, well, what is this phase 2? What does the quote unquote new normal look like? And so, we've even had to pivot and change from our initial messaging. John, good to see you checking in. John says, what's up, everybody? Glad to see somebody alive in the chat. All right, so here, let me start with this quote. I love this when I found this from one of my favorite actors, Tom Hanks. He says, "You're a dope if you haven't stolen from everyone you've ever worked with." And of course, he said that from an acting standpoint of an actor as he was being interviewed. And, he said, look, I take things from everybody. And I've really tried to develop that same mindset myself. And so the material and the things that I'm going to share with you, while it's things that I've implemented and helped clients implement, it's certainly not just Chad's material, right? I've taken a lot of this from other Sandler trainers, from other mentors I have, and put it into the presentation. And I would expect you to do the same, right? So steal some of this stuff and you repackage it, and you'll probably do a better job of selling it on your own. So let me start with this, and I'm going to ask you to open the chat box now. So hopefully you've got that up and going. Katie, good to see you in there. Here's something I want you to ask. Or respond to, I'm sorry. What frustrations are you or your people dealing with right now in any one of these categories? Activity, emotions, or outcomes? So what frustrations? There might be frustrations for your staff, might be for yourself, but in terms of the activity we're able to do on a business basis, or the activity that's not being done, maybe any emotional type of challenges that people are still struggling with. Think the head trash stuff, or maybe it's the results, the outcomes. So what activity, emotions, and outcomes do you have? If you've got something that comes to mind that where either you or your folks are struggling with, or they're not doing everything you wish they were on one of those buckets, what are those things? Drop them in the chat as you're going there. Todd says, not meeting in person with clients. I feel you there, Todd. I understand. Zoom has been certainly a huge help for a lot of us, but it is not the same thing as the person to person. I would agree. Katie says R&D, rip off and duplicate. Oh, good. Back to my initial quote there. That's excellent. John says outcome, slower paced customers and employees. Right, so maybe prospects and customers have scaled back, or they're not responding as quickly. And interestingly, I've seen that on both ends. I've seen some people who are struggling because they're saying, look, in my industry, my prospects are busier than they've ever been, and I can't get a response. And of course, on the other side of that is, hey, in my industry, everybody's scared to death, so they're not doing anything, right? But both of them lead to slower outcomes. And then also employees, right? So we have employees who are still struggling, I'm sure, to get through to this new normal, and how do we engage and how do we work through this? Katie says no networking events. I know, especially with EO, that is a huge bummer because unquestionably EO has the best networking events there are. And so I know that's something that everybody is bummed about. And certainly there's other things probably that you're engaged in as well that you've been missing. And so these are challenges we've got. What I mentioned, in the lead up to this in the material was we're going to talk about three different distinct areas. We're going to talk about, Christina says information overload. Yep, I hear you there too, Christina. So many, I mentioned that the success of that very first webinar I did, which happened on March 17th, 400 people live, thousands watching the replay. I think I was probably one of the very first to pull that off, especially with the number of guests that I had. But guess what happened in the subsequent weeks? Everybody started, a new Zoom with, the same types of titles and things. And so after a while, what was really great in those first few weeks, now everybody's got fatigue, right? You've probably heard this from your clients, your employees, and maybe even you yourself. Oh, I've got Zoom fatigue. And so, I'm certainly aware of that. But there's three areas for success that Sandler teaches in all of our programs, whether it's sales, customer service, leadership, and that is behavior. That is our blueprint for success. What is it we need to be doing? What are those actions we need to be taking on a regular basis? And then there's the attitude piece, and that's really our belief system. How do we feel about the company? How do we feel about our market that we're in, our industry or sector? And most importantly on that piece, how do we feel about ourselves, right? How do I feel about myself as it relates to reaching out for new business? How do I feel about myself when I have to pick up the phone or send that email or ask that tough question? And so attitude's a big piece. And then the third part of that success triangle is technique. And that's the tactical approach. How do I ask the question, or what types of questions should I be asking? Or, how do I structure a sales call with this person? And so we're going to spend a little time on each one of those. And after that initial dive into the BAT piece, I'm really going to get into, as I mentioned, a lot of questions. I think I've got 70 or more questions built into this presentation for you to be asking yourself, your employees, your clients, and your prospects. So let's look at some behavioral best practices. First is schedule orientation. Maintaining a schedule orientation is so crucial right now, right? I know some of us are better than others. Some of you are just so honed in on your schedule that nothing takes you off of it, and everything on your outlook is completely full every day because you even schedule your margin time, which is actually a good best practice. And then there are others of us who really struggle to be that dedicated to a schedule. It's not that we're not busy, not that we're not doing anything, but that's just not where we are. Well, let me tell you, the schedule orientation piece has become so much more important in this new world. You probably know people who have said in the past, if I had more time, I would do this, or I'd learn this language, or I'd read these books, or I'd pick up this new skill. And of course, we had several weeks where we all had probably, if we're honest, more time on our hands than we're ever typically used to having. But how many people did that, right? The people who always said, if I just had more time, I would do this, probably end up watching Tiger King, right? Or something else on Netflix. And as a result, we don't use our schedule the way we should. And so, that what I like to call time blocking is so important when it comes to scheduling. The next thing is I want to talk about a couple of metrics. I know a lot of people on this session or either in business development, or you lead teams that certainly depend on business development at some point. And so I want to speak to that. A couple of key metrics for me are, number one is meaningful conversations. And what a meaningful conversation for me is defined as a conversation I have with someone who can make a decision to do business with me. And so I put a couple of gates around that metric, right? So number one, they've got to be willing to, or they've got to be able to make that decision to do business with me, for me to call it a meaningful conversation. And the other thing is, for me to call it a meaningful conversation, they've got to be willing to at least look at the first step in our process, right? Which would be scheduling that first meeting book, right? So they've got to be willing to engage. They've got to be willing to make a decision for me to call it a meaningful conversation. So this is one of the things we measure in my organization all of the time. For me personally, a good number for me to be on track is somewhere between 5 and 8 meaningful conversations each week, right? So that's net new conversations, by the way. So I'm not counting conversations with people who are already in my pipeline. I'm not counting conversations with current clients, but net new meaningful conversations, somebody who can make a decision. And then the follow on to that is first meetings booked. So those are, that's one of the things that we really double down on after the middle of March, which is let's make sure we're continuing to have the right number of meaningful conversations, and let's look at how many first meetings did we book. And so that's one of those things when you're talking about that behavioral piece, that blueprint for success, I would encourage you. And then we can kind of work backwards on goals from that, right? I can figure out, because I'm keeping data and ratios, okay, well, how many meaningful conversations lead to a first meeting book? How many first meeting booked lead to the next step, and eventually how many of those lead to a sale? So we can extrapolate and work backwards from that. Next one, what about attitude? And again, I'm specifically, we'll get into some more broad base for some of these things, but for this point, I'm really talking about sales. What kind of best practices do I have when it approaches business development and sales? And so one I like to talk about is the gumball theory. Everybody's seen those gumball machines that are at malls, that these giant gumball machines. They have hundreds, if not thousands, of gumballs, right? Brightly colored gumballs in them. And when I was a kid, I love those things, right? Like a lot of kids did, but I particularly loved the green gumballs. Green was my favorite. Just like the flavor, I don't know. I like the way they may have all tasted the same. Didn't matter to me. I was a kid, right? So green to me was the best kind. And so I was looking for those green gumballs. Now, when I'd put my quarter into the machine though, and I turn that crank, you know, and out would come this gumball, and some of them have the fancy thing where they go around and they spiral down. Sometimes I'd turn the crank and out would come what? Maybe a yellow gumball. And I did not like yellow gumballs. So what would I do? I'd usually turn around and hand that one to my brother, who I also didn't like. And I'd let him have the yellow gumball. And then I'd put another quarter in the machine, and I'd turn it around and crank, and here it would come, and all of a sudden down would come a purple gumball. And I really didn't like purple gumballs, right? So if there was somebody else to give it to, maybe I would, or you chuck it away, and I'd put in another quarter. And I turn it again, and finally, look what, here comes a green gumball. And now I was excited because that was the one that I wanted. That was what I was looking for. And as it relates to prospecting, I think we need to develop, especially now, this gumball theory of prospecting, which is, look, my job is not, I can't predict who's going to be the green gumball, right? I can't predict that that's going to come out. I can't make that, force that. But what I can do is keep turning that crank. And eventually I know when I do that, guess what I'm going to have? I'm going to have what I'm looking for, which is that green gumball. And so part of my attitude I take into prospecting all the time, but especially now, is just looking for a green gumball. Oh, no, this one's a yellow. We'll put that in a marketing drip, right? Oh, this one's a purple. We'll never reach out to them again. They're not a fit at all. Well, guess what? When I keep doing it, here comes a green. And so that's part of the attitude piece that I've taken to this is, look, it's just, to me, it's just like searching for the gumball you want. If you keep turning the crank, feeding the machine, guess what? You're going to get your share of green gumballs. The second piece I bring in an attitude standpoint to prospecting is I always am collaborative, even with my prospects or my suspects, as we call them in Sandler. They've got to earn the right to become a prospect. So I'm always collaborative in my approach versus combative. I'm always looking for, in my mind, how might I be able to help this person? In fact, those are questions that I'll often ask, as I get engaged with somebody is, how are you hoping I might be able to help you? And taking that idea that, hey, let's look together, and maybe this is a fit, maybe it's not, and if it's not, that's okay. But would you mind sharing some of the areas you're struggling, or maybe some of the concerns you've got, and being collaborative with them, working with them to see if we're a fit or not. And that's really my whole point, right? Are we a fit? Are we not? And then the final piece, which goes along with that, is for attitude, equal business stature. Knowing that my time is just as valuable as those people's time that I'm reaching out to. And so I've got to guard that, which means I don't want to spend my time doing a lot of free consulting with somebody who may never be a prospect for me, right? There's a place for added value, and we've already touched on that, but we'll talk on that more. But I don't want to get stuck spending a lot of time spinning my wheels with somebody who's not a fit or who's not going to be ready to make a decision anytime soon. And so I always take that approach, that mindset into any conversation I have, that, I know your time is valuable, so is mine. So let's figure out if we're a fit to move forward or to spend more time. And if we're not, that's perfectly okay. So I think that equal business stature becomes important. Finally, on technique, best practices on technique when we're prospecting, keep it conversational. I'm fine with, some businesses like to use scripts. I'm fine with a script if you can make it conversational, which means, guess what? You've got to do a lot of role play and a lot of practice to make that conversational. But if you sound like you're scripted, right? Those people, everybody can relate. You've gotten the call from the telemarketer who doesn't even take a breath because they've been trained that, nope, you just keep talking no matter what. And as you're trying to cut them off possibly, or to tell them no thank you, what do? They just keep going. And when you say no thanks, now they've got another script they veer into for that. To me, that's not an effective way to sell. Certainly not if you're selling at for a long-term relationship at a premium. And so keeping it conversational, hey, wanted to check in and see how you're doing. One of the things that I do when I start, I usually will say something to the effect of, hey, John, appreciate you picking up the phone. My name is Chad Stenzel with Sandler Training of Hampton Roads. I don't suppose that rings a bell. Guess what? Most of the time I get, nope, never heard of you. I figured that was the case. Hey, I'd like to spend 30 seconds telling you why I'm calling, but before I do, can I just ask you this? How are you guys doing right now? Right? So that's a very simple conversational intro to my cold call. And you might be asking yourself, you actually make cold calls? I am a believer in cold calls. I don't believe all this stuff that says cold calls are dead, and I'll explain why in a moment. But you could also take that same scripting and turn it into an email. You can tweak it and turn it into a LinkedIn message. So when I say call or outreach, really, you could use any method for this, but keep it conversational, keep it simple, right? There are all kinds of, we typically talk about a 30-second commercial in Sandler because really that should be about all it takes to determine if they want to discuss any further, right? If your 30-second commercial doesn't hit them to where they say, hey, yeah, some of that sounds interesting, or even if they say, well, you know what, sounds interesting, but now's not a good time. Okay, when would be a better time? It should be simple. It shouldn't be a 4 or 5 minute, all right, buckle up. I'm going to be, get comfortable because you're going to be there a while. So I like to keep it simple and then keep it structured. And we won't have time in this session to go through the entire structure of that pitch. But if you're interested in hearing more of how we do that, I'd be happy to do that. But the structure should include something like this: a brief introduction, who you are, who you're with, telling them a little bit about the kind of individuals or companies you work with. And then I like to list 2 or 3 pain points, right? In Sandler, we talk in terms of pain. And what are the 2 or 3 pain points of people that we deal with or we work with, right? So those are obviously going to be different depending on what you're selling and what industry you're in. But, for me, it might be something like, John, I'm not sure if you're the one I should even be talking to or not, but let me tell you about what we do. I work with companies who are, everything from construction and manufacturing to technology, services, financial services. And I work with leaders who are frustrated by inconsistent results, or maybe they're concerned about where their business is going to go over the next 6 months, or they're so busy right now and they're doing so well that they're worried some things are going to start to slip through the cracks as it relates to their sales funnel and pipeline. Now, I don't know if any of those things ring a bell or they apply to you or not, right? That's the basic structure. Now that person, and again, by the way, I should also say, out of role play, you probably should have 8 or 9 versions of those pain points, right? Because depending on who I'm calling and talking to, whether they're a sales manager or they're an owner or they're a solopreneur, they've probably got different pain points, and maybe even depending on what field they're in. And so I tweak that, those 2 or 3 things. But that's the simple structure. And then, I'm waiting for an answer. If I get a positive answer on that, if I get a no, right, that's probably a purple gumball, right? If they say, no, none of that stuff really applies to us. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to drag something out of them. Now, I may follow up with 1 or 2 more questions. Sounds like everything's going really well. John, would you mind sharing with me what's the secret to success? How are you all doing so well in these current times? Again, just keeping it conversational, right? I'm going to let them talk. I'm focused on them. But that's the basic structure. And if they do hit on something, then, hey, if they say, all those things are a concern, I might say, well, which one would you like to talk about first? Which one's the biggest deal? And I'm pushing them into that conversation. It's 2 or 3 minutes long. And at the end of that, it's saying, hey, it sounds like we might have, something more to talk about. Would it make sense for us to schedule, 15, 20 minutes to dive in a little bit deeper on some of these things when you've got more time? And that's about as non-threatening and simple and structured as you can get, right, for a quote unquote cold call. But that's just a piece of that. By the way, here's another piece that we've implemented in the last 2 months to sort of tweak our 30-second commercial. And that is to get the person you're talking to, and again, you can do this by email just as easily, or you can do this through LinkedIn or whatever you're using. We've talked to a lot of people about the impact. So this is after a quick introduction, right? We've talked to a lot of people about the impact of the current situation on their business, and we're hearing one of two situations. Some people believe this is the time to batten down the hatches, ride out the storm, and just survive for another day. Others are finding themselves in the fortunate position they can still grow during this time, and they're looking to pivot quickly. Which situation would you say your company is in? Let them choose, right? Give them two buckets. If they say, "Oh, we're number one," you know, we're not making any decisions. We're not, you know, we're just trying to hang on. That's going to tell me that you know, for me personally, in my world, right, that's probably not somebody who I'm going to spend a lot of bandwidth on working to try to pull them over. Now, I might have a follow-up question to that answer, which would be something to this effect. If you thought you could move to bucket number 2, would you be interested? Right. In other words, if you thought there was a way you could get out of that just try to survive mode and actually grow and pivot and change, would you be interested in hearing about how people are doing that? So that's, you know, that's my follow-up to that. But if they say, no, not really, great, purple gumball. But if they say, hey, we're the kind of company that we're looking for, we're always changing. And we were changing and we were morphing and we were learning and grabbing onto things before any of this hit, right? Then that tells me, hey, this is probably somebody worth having a longer conversation with. They're not going to give me the excuse of, well, we're just not doing anything right now. So that's just a few tweaks on that 30-second pitch. And then the idea that I want you to convey to your people is, how are we selling the opportunity forward? That's so important right now. In a couple pieces of that, right? So the first one is we need to have a strong opening when we have that. So let's say after that, they say, yeah, let's sit down for a 30-minute phone call or Zoom or whatever. So have a strong opening. We need to be intentional. We need to have a goal. We need to share with them the goal of the conversation. Okay, well, if we're going to talk, if we're going to schedule this, here's what I think we ought to be willing to talk about. Here's some questions we're going to have for you. What are the questions you're going to have for us? And then we need to clearly define what does yes and no look like at the end of that meeting. Yeah, we do that at the front end. So what I'm telling people, look, at the end of this session, you know, at the end of that 30-minute conversation, we may very well decide that we're not a fit to work together, and that is perfectly fine. I'll let you know if I don't think you're a fit. Will you please let me know if you don't think I'm a fit to work with you? On the other hand, if we do decide we're a fit to move forward, let me explain to you what that would look like. And this piece is important. So if you're taking notes, or if you're in business development, or you're going to share this with your team, don't miss this piece. You've got to then tell them, what does yes mean at the end of the meeting? So no is okay, takes them off the hook. All the pressure's off on the meeting now because I've given them permission to tell me no. But if it's yes, here's what yes would look like, right? And that's going to be different for all of you depending on your structure and how you're set up. Yes might be yes to another meeting, right, with more players. Yes might be we're going to ask you to sign an agreement, right? A professional services agreement or something. Yes might be we're going to ask for a check. Whatever yes is, clearly explain that to them. So now in their mind, they know I've got two clear opportunities. I've got no, I can say, or I can say yes to whatever the next step is. And then in that meeting, the meaningful middle, this is where we discuss changes that are happening for them, challenges they're facing right now. And we're going to go through a series of questions. And again, I told you I'm going to share a lot of questions with you on this. But we're going to ask, this is the meaningful middle, is where we ask a lot of questions. And we get them to share with us where they're struggling, or what they wish they had, or what they'd like to have, or what they hope, you know, we'd be able to help them with. And the other piece is we got to deliver clarity on our process. Whatever our process is, if they choose to work for us, are we clearly defining what that looks like? And then finally, at the end of that meeting, a strong close. This is where we talk about clear futures. And this has been the key to our success. You know, we've actually closed more business in the last 2 months than I did probably in the prior 4. And one of the ways we've been able to do that is by demanding clear futures at the end of every conversation we have with people. And a clear future is simply this: Are we done? Is there no point moving forward, or are we taking the next step? And if we're taking the next step, here's what I need you, Mr. Prospect or Miss Prospect, to do, and here's what I'll be doing ahead of that next step, right? So we both got skin in the game. If we're gonna move to the next step, here's what I'm gonna need you to get from me, or you to do for me. Here's what I'm gonna do for you, and here's when that will happen by. That's a clear future. Who does what by when? Schedule that. And then the other thing I like to do is take the temperature, right? At every, other people I've heard phrase it this way: show your prospect the exit at every turn. So I always want to give them a chance, even after that first meeting. Are you sure it makes sense for us to move forward to this next step? And if not, no big deal, right? I'm okay with that. But take their temperature. Are they excited about moving forward in the engagement, or do they seem hesitant? And if they seem hesitant, I usually will, I always tell them that perfectly understandable. If you're not certain, then let's just go ahead and say we're probably not going to work together at this time. And if I can come back to you at another time and see if they fight for it, right? Some people will say, well, no, I'm not saying we shouldn't work together now. But if they don't, if they seem relieved by that, then know that you saved yourself a lot of headache, right? You saved yourself being ghosted. How many have that happened to, right? You're ghosted. You don't hear from them. They don't answer your emails, your phone calls. I'd rather get that out of the way while I've got them on the phone or on the Zoom or in person than have to spend all my time following up and not hearing from them. So take that temperature at the end. Make sure they're ready to move to whatever that next step is. Let's talk about leadership, critical factors. And again, for the sake of time, I did not get to every piece of this in here, but I'm going to go through these very quickly. Again, if you're interested, by the way, so I've been offering an expanded version of this over 4 sessions for leaders, and we've got another one for salespeople. Happy to have that discussion. You can reach out to me at chad.stenzel@sandler.com if you're interested in that. But I'm going to try to get through these all but one of these. We won't spend a lot of time on metrics, but would love to talk about management mindset and our methodology here. And so I like this quote from James Lane Allen. He says, "Circumstances do not determine a leader, they reveal him or her," right? So it's not the circumstances that determine whether you're successful. It's just going to simply reveal what kind of leader you always were. And so I want to start, as we get through some of these questions, with questions to maybe ask ourselves. And so here's the first one. And I know time is short, but I'm going to ask you, if you can, some of you share your thoughts in the chat box right now. If a leader was going to crash and burn in times like this, what would he or she do, or what would they fail to do? If a leader was going to crash and burn in a scenario like we find ourselves in right now, what do you think, what would they do that would cause that, or what would they fail to do, perhaps, that would cause them to crash and burn right now? Go ahead and type in lack of strategic planning or succession planning. Okay, good. Other thoughts? What do you think? What would leaders? And by the way, these are questions for you to ponder, right? So there's not right or wrong. These are things I want you to be thinking and working through in your own head right now. Other thoughts? What would they be doing or failing to do? I think one, as I'm waiting for others to jump in, I think one that I would say is, are they communicating? Are they communicating clearly, with clarity, on a regular basis? And that means to their employees, their vendor partners, as well as their, certainly, customers and prospects. Rudy says adapt and innovate. So failing to adapt and innovate, absolutely. And so we take that question and turn it on its head next, and we say, if a leader were to thrive in an environment like this, what would he or she do or not do? So those who are thriving, right? So you could turn some of that, right? So they are communicating, they would adapt, they would see themselves as innovative. They would, so final question to that is, what should we be doing or not doing? And so I want, again, this is really more for yourself. John says panic and not make decisions fast enough, like missing PPP money. Yep. No, you're fine, John. Thank you. So yes, things like that, by not making quick decisions, you end up losing out. And the same goes obviously with prospects. If you don't prospect, somebody else will. And so here are a few more questions for ourselves as leaders. What's your personal mission statement at this moment? What is your personal mission statement? And you don't need to respond in the chat to these, but these are good questions that you ought to be taking note, thinking through if you haven't done that. Do you bring real value to the marketplace right now? How? Are you making the current situation better or worse? You as a leader, are you making your current situation better or worse, and how? Should more suspects know what you do, right? So we're saying not prospects, even more suspects. Should we be doing more to reach more people than we have been currently? Are you entitled to prospect in your marketplace? Do you believe that you are? I know certainly in those first weeks, I heard from a lot of people who were struggling with the mental part of, gee, I don't know if I should be selling. I feel so weird selling right now. And so some of that, some of that sort of thing may be going on in your organization. People struggling with this idea of, well, should we really be selling right now? And of course, the answer is, if you don't, your competition will. Right? So I don't think there's ever been a better time for companies to unseat incumbents than right now. But guess what that also means? That means your clients to someone else, the competition is looking at them as a prime opportunity. And so that's where it goes back to, yes, we should be prospecting. Yes, we should be reaching out, but we should also be having very clear, constant communication with our current clients. What goals are you shooting for? What do they look like? Again, these are questions for you as a leader. And then here's another one. What am I learning? How many of you have taken time to plug into some of the live Zoomcasts, podcasts, meetings, right? And I know EO is great about this, but if we're not careful, right, even somebody who's plugged into EO could have used time in the last couple months probably to say, oh, I don't have time to really dive into that right now. I'm too busy trying to figure this out over here. I think it's crucial. We're always learning, and so question becomes, where does wisdom come from? And I love this definition of wisdom. Wisdom comes from evaluated experience, right? In that key word, evaluated. In other words, some people would say, well, wisdom comes from experience. Well, not if you don't learn from it, right? Some people have 20 years of experience, say they have 20 years of experience, and really they've got 1 year repeated 20 times because they don't evaluate the things they've been through. And so one of the things that I've gotten really intentional about, and I would encourage you if you're not, is just daily journaling. Daily journaling. And so I know a lot of you are already doing that, but I would encourage you to really up your journal game over these months, because you can learn so much from what, reflecting and thinking and working through what have you done. So here's just a few questions that I like to journal on. Number one, I always start with this. What am I grateful for? What are my goals today? What did I learn yesterday? That's a great one. Because if you have 2 or 3 days in a row where that's a blank, then guess what? You need to get out of your comfort zone. What is one habit I want to develop? What is my one thing today, right? So what's that main thing today? What am I prepared to do to get me or my team ahead? Who can I help today? Who can help me today? And what will I intentionally learn more about today? Those are just a sampling, but those are good questions. If you're not journaling, I can't stress enough how important it is. It's made a huge difference for us as we're journaling and using that time to really think through, where did we do well? Where did we miss? What do we want to accomplish? So I really encourage you, good questions to think through as leaders. Next one, as it relates to my company, my organization, my business development. What area is suffering the most, right? These are questions for you to just thinking about. Is it lead generation right now? Is it lead development? So maybe we've got leads, we're struggling to really push them into the pipeline and develop. Is it discovery? Is it that part of it? Is it just getting all the right questions answered or asking those good questions? Is it the qualification process? right? Are we doing a good job of qualifying people right now? Or do I have salespeople who are just so excited to talk to anybody that they don't really qualify, right? We just go straight into presentation mode. Is it the control and close aspect? Are we struggling to really maintain control of the conversation and the sales process? Or are we letting prospects sort of lead us into their process, which we know always extends sales cycles, leads to a lot of think it overs and probably a lot of beating us up on price. So are we losing there? Maybe it's in the delight, which is the service delivery. Are we struggling there? Or are we struggling and suffering most in expanding relationships? So maybe you know what you've noticed over these past few months is, you know, we've got business, but we're not getting the market, the share that we should be out of these existing relationships. And so we're struggling there. So asking yourself, which area, where do I need to focus on? And then this question, how could I move faster? This goes back to the pivot piece we talked about up front. The history of failure in war, or in any other endeavor for that fact, can be summed up in 2 words: too late. So, you know, when I describe those 2 buckets, if you find yourself, or you found yourself in that bucket of, we're just trying to hang on, we're just trying to hope to ride out this storm, that's what you're in danger of, right? You're in danger of finally coming to grips after it's too late, right? Don't be Blockbuster. Don't be the Blockbuster of COVID, right? Things were going really great, and then all this stuff happened, and we just kept waiting for the old normal to return. And so that, you know, there's nothing wrong with tweaking your approach. I've certainly had to do it, right? I've had to tweak, not just going to virtual and, you know, the video piece. I've had to develop new programs. Some of the programs that we were offering before, they weren't going to work necessarily in the current environment. And so we shifted in terms of not the content as much, but how we were packaging them, you know, shorter programs, less time, because we needed to create some momentum. And so what's your pivot? How can you pivot and change? And not because you have to change your entire business model, but maybe it's the way you're offering it. Maybe it's the way you're engaging. Maybe you've got new sectors to open up that you've never even considered before. A lot of companies have shifted and begun delivering things to frontline hospital workers before that were maybe only delivered to police and, you know, EMT types and firefighters. And they've said, well, now, you know, maybe our services actually apply to these ER nurses and doctors. And so how can you pivot for the time you're in? Here's a good question. I want you to answer this one and think about it in the chat, to give you just a few seconds. What initiative in your organization is not gathering momentum that is critical and requires your involvement to maximize your ROI? I take that back. You don't need to answer that in the chat, but I do want you to ask yourself that question. Right now, what initiative do I have in my organization that's not picking up enough momentum? It's critical, and I need to get in and maximize the return on investment for this initiative. I guarantee if you think about that, there'll be something that comes to mind that right now, things that you've quote unquote put on the back burner, or everybody's sort of, you know, let fall, you know, as kind of under the table. It's time to, you know, there might be something critical right now that you need to really dig in on. Here's a series of questions for your sales or business development people. And again, you know, for time's sake, if anybody wants me to walk through sort of the reasoning behind these questions, I'm happy to come back and do that later. But just real quickly, I'll highlight a few of these. Walk me through this week's cookbook. And Sandler terminology, cookbook, simply you know, what we put together, what kind of prospecting or business development activities am I going to be doing this week, right? So how many emails, how many phone calls, how many networking events back when we could do those, how many Zooms, right? Whatever those are. Maybe it's trade shows, right? Whatever. What's the cookbook look like for this particular person? These are questions leaders and managers should be asking salespeople. What are you happy with about your plan for the week? What are you not happy with? How about this one? What caused you to become frustrated this week? So important to be able to ask those kind of questions, because I promise you, no matter how good your culture is, no matter how excited your people typically are when they talk, there's things that frustrate them, right? And that happens all the time, but it's especially true right now. And so you might have people who are afraid to come to you and say, you know, I'm really struggling with this, or, you know, I don't know how we're going to get past this. We should be asking that question. Where are you frustrated? Can you walk me through a pre-call plan from this week? So what kind of, before they had that meeting, what kind of planning did they put in place? And what are, you know, what did they do a plan at all, or did they just wing it? And again, another session, we can talk about what's a good pre-call plan look like. What was your best upfront contract from the week? And can I hear it? An upfront contract in Sandler terminology, we already talked about, it's simply agreeing with the prospect or the client to why are we meeting? How long are we going to talk? Is it going to be on Zoom, or is it going to be over the phone? What do you expect to happen in the meeting? Here's what I expect to happen in the meeting, and what will happen at the end. That's an upfront contract. What was your biggest success at work this week? And what elements contributed to it? What's your biggest priority for the next 3 days? Oh, these are good questions. I hope you're asking these questions of your folks. Can you talk me through a conversation this week where you created competitive advantage? Don't you want to know the answer to that? Right? And even if it's a really bad answer, right? Even if they just stare at you blankly when you ask that question, now you know, okay, now I know where to start with my coaching or my training. Have you gone about, how have you gone about juggling priorities this week? And then looking back over the last 5 days, where do you wish you'd been stronger? Of course, you can ask the other side of that too, where, you know, where are you, you know, most proud of what you've done over the last 5 days. And then here's the next thing. Here's the underlying question to all that, to your employee. How can I help? After I've asked all these things, right? How can I help? John says these slides are great. Will you share when you're done, please? Yeah, John, if you will email me, I will send you a copy of them. Happy to do that. How can I help? These are things that we need to be asking. And so, by the way, let me aside, I'm just checking time because I know I'm going to struggle to get through everything I want to get through here in the next 7 or 8 minutes. How can I help is not how can I do the job for you? Okay. So it's about support. It's how can I support you? It's not what can I take off your plate and do for you. As leaders, so we certainly want to be a support. We want to figure out what can we do to make them more successful. Let's talk a bit about mindset. I love this quote from Mark Twain. He says, it's not what you don't know that hurts you. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And here's your job. If you're an EO or you're a strategic alliance partner watching this, your role in your organization, one of your roles is the CMO. You are the chief mindset officer. And so what we have to be willing to do is make sure, obviously, we're checking our own mindset on all of these things, but also taking the temperature of how do our people see this opportunity? How do they feel about it? And here, I like this part of the quote too. When a fact is used as a reason for failure, it becomes an excuse, right? So what does that mean? Are excuses sometimes, excuses can be based in fact, but it shouldn't be, but that fact doesn't have to be the reason that I'm struggling or failing, right? I get to choose that. And so I love this belief wheel that we use in a lot of our presentations. Some of you have seen this before from me, but we all go through this. We have beliefs. Here's what we think. Here's what I believe. Then we pass judgments based on those beliefs on what we think other people think. That causes us to take an action because of those judgments we make, which then yields a result, which then reinforces that belief we have, right? And so we've got to realize that part of what we've got to do as leaders is help people talk about where they're struggling and get them to change how they think about that. Give a quick example. Maybe right now I think it's a horrible time to be calling high into an organization, right? Maybe, my boss is always on me saying, Chad, you need to call to the C-level, to the owner. You got to call higher in an organization. And in my mind, I'm saying, Well, I don't think that's going to work because, if I were running an organization right now, I wouldn't want to be bothered by anybody. I've got too many other ththings I'm worried about. And I don't have time for that normally, but I really don't have time for it right now when we're in the middle of COVID. And so as a result of that, that's my thinking. So what do I say? You know what? Hey, I'd call that CEO, or I'd call that owner, or I'd call that executive, but he's not going to have time for me because, nobody wants to be bothered right now. There's too much going on. So then what? I don't call up into the organization, or I try it once, right? I'm like, my boss has been on me. All right, let me call this CEO. And I half-heartedly try one time. I get a red gumball. And so what do? I say, yep, that person didn't want to hear from me. See, I knew it. I knew it was a waste of time to call higher in an organization. So it reinforces that belief. What if instead we said, you know what, now is the best time there's probably ever been to reach out to CEOs. I mentioned some of the names earlier that I couldn't believe. I was within about 5 back and forth messages. I'm on the phone with Carly Fiorina, had her on for a 30-minute session live with my clients talking about leadership. Now, my head trash could have been, there's no way she's going to talk to me right now, right? Instead, I said, you know what? She's probably, anxious to share her knowledge with a bunch of people right now because she's been through a lot in her life. And why wouldn't she want to be, in front of a broader group who's maybe never heard her story before? And so I changed that belief, which led me to now take bolder action, get better results, and reinforce the belief that now is the best time to be reaching out to people who are, high in an organization. And so that belief wheel becomes important. So here's a question for you to ponder. What head trash is viral within your organization and needs to be eliminated immediately? What head trash is viral in your organization and needs to be eliminated immediately? I want you to think through that one and answer that one for yourself. Real quickly, and I was afraid we'd run out of time. I'm not sure if anybody's able to stick on. Actually, let me ask Christina, since you're on, Christina, if you can unmute for just a second. If we went 5, 6, 7 minutes over, is that going to be okay? Is that
no, that won't be a problem at all.
Okay, great. All right, good. Thank you. And John says you're fine. Good. So for your clients or your prospects, I'm sorry, which of the 3 buckets are they in? Are they in businesses booming, businesses in a downturn, or it's catastrophic terminal decline, right? And each one of those has their unique challenges or, pains, as we call them again in Sandler. But it's important to get a baseline to figure out, what is it for them? Because you may be able to position your product or service to each one of those 3, but you're going to position it differently, right? If business is booming, if people are, for me, as somebody who sells sales training, when somebody says, hey, business is booming, I know that probably the bigger pain for them is, are you getting enough profit margin? And are you qualifying the right opportunities, right? It's not, oh, we got plenty of leads, we got plenty of, yeah, but are they all as profitable as you wish they were? Are you closing those profitable deals as quickly as you'd like to? And are you doing it consistently, right? So that might be a business is booming thing. If business is in a downturn, do you wish your people did more prospecting? Do you wish that you had a better plan for reaching out to past customers and asking for referrals? Or if it's in a terminal decline, right? If you thought you could, if you thought there was an emergency shoot you weren't aware of, would you be interested in hearing about it, right? So there's going to be different ways you'll approach clients based on those buckets. And so there may be new pain indicators for some of your people. One of the terms we use in Sandler a lot is FUD-WACA. And some of you may have heard that before. It's not necessarily just a Sandler terminology, but it stands for this: frustrated, upset, disappointed, worried, angry, concerned, or anxious. Those are emotional trigger words, right? When you hear, John, I see you got to go. No worries, John. We'll get you the recording of the rest if you're interested. When people hear those emotional trigger words, they will obviously, what that tells me is there's something to that there. When I hear somebody say, well, I'm really frustrated by this, or I'm upset, or I'm disappointed in this, those are things that tell me I probably need to ask a few more questions about that. They indicate pain-based issues. They might form the basis of a unique value-based proposition that I can offer. You know, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. You ought to have 5 or 6 pain indicators for every customer segment or vertical that you sell to, right? So I use a different set when I'm talking to a salesperson than I do for a sales manager than I do for an owner, right? They could be in the same organization, but they've got different pains. And so the same thing for your product and service, right? You can also use these pain indicator terms in a lot of places: LinkedIn, cold calls, emails, referral asks, trade shows, right? There's a number of ways you can repurpose these things. What are those pains that your prospects, the people who end up doing business with you and become clients, what are the things that they're most concerned about? That's probably what you're going to catch a lot of prospects with. Some questions for prospects. And again, I'll do my best to keep this within about 5 or 6 minutes. So if you can stick, that would be great. If you got to go, we understand. When would be the best time for us to connect? 2 weeks, 4, you know, if they put you off, if they say, hey, now's not a good time, when would be a better time? 2 weeks, 4 weeks, or 6 weeks from now? And whatever they respond to, my question is, would you mind if I asked you, you know, why is 6 weeks going to be better? And I do it in the way that I get the, you know, I do it in a way that's safe. I'm not coming off as a jerk. I'm not saying, oh, why that? But hey, would you mind sharing with me why 6 weeks would be better? Just curious, you know, is there something happening in the next, because that'll tell you, are they just putting me off, right, as long as they can? Or do they say, no, actually, you know, our new fiscal starts within that time frame, and I'm going to be willing to look at some new things then that I can't do right now. Okay, great. 6 weeks sounds perfect then. How would you like me to best connect, right? So in other words, email, phone, text. What do you need to see in order for you to want to chat sooner? Is there anything that, you know, would make you want to talk sooner than that? I love this question. What pieces of good news are you hearing right now? Particularly if you get that person who's engaging you and everything is doom and gloom and, oh my gosh, we're all going to die and we're all out of business. Well, I hear you. Are you hearing any good news right now in your sector? What's the good stuff you're hearing? Get them to think positively. It might be the only time they have in the past 2 months. How are our competitors responding? I love this, particularly if you've got an incumbent that you're trying to unseat. You know, hey, what are the good? I appreciate it. You know, I heard that you're using this company right now for that service, and they're great. Wait, what kind of new ideas have they been giving you over the last two or 3 weeks or 4 weeks? And just see what you get, right? Because what you might get is, we haven't heard from them in 3 or 4 weeks. Oh, okay, well, that's interesting. Look at my connections. Who would be a good connection for you right now? Right, so another great question. Jump on LinkedIn. Is there somebody that I could connect you with in my connections that would be a good I could make a good introduction for you. So again, giving some value first for the prospects. Finally, I'll close with questions for clients. What's the latest view of things from your perspective? How could I help? When should we do more of a strategic review? And this is really important, right? We talked about that communication. If you've not taken the time to have a strategic conversation or asked for one, or maybe you asked and they put you off, now is a good time to follow back up with that. Remember, your best clients are somebody else's best prospects. So when can we have a strategic review? What's coming down the line next that's worrying you most? What are your customers, prospects reporting? What's one piece of good news? Again, what are you telling your clients? And is there anybody else in your business that I either could or should be talking to? Another great question, particularly if it's a larger organization. You know, is there anybody else that, you know, might benefit from a conversation right now? They may open you to an entire new line of business. Here's one more another question for us. What aspect of your sales approach needs to become absolutely second nature to all those involved in its execution? So another good question. If your sales process is not as refined and process driven as you would like it to be, you know, what do we need to do to make it that way? What do we need to do to make it second nature so everybody's on the same page doing it the same way? I appreciate everybody hanging in. I'm stop real quickly with some expectations. I think we all need to raise expectations as leaders. Don't accept mediocrity. We wouldn't accept it any other time. I know nobody on this call, because you're involved with EO, would ever be okay with mediocrity, but do that checkup to say, you know what, have I accepted it in the last 2 months from my employees or even myself sometimes, because we've let the circumstances dictate how we're going to operate. Don't be held hostage to the circumstances. Certainly, we're separated probably from some of our people more than we'd like to be, or even our clients, our prospects. However, we don't want to isolate from them, meaning I ought to be communicating more with my employees now than I ever have in the past. And then the other big key is find a peer group that's the best of the best. And you've already done that because you're associated with EO. So those are some of the keys. I've just got a couple things I'm going to share as I'm closing out, but if you've got one lesson learned or takeaway, and I know a lot of folks have had to drop off, but if you have a lesson learned or takeaway from the session, would you drop that real quick in the chat? I'd like to share some of those with folks. What's one lesson or one takeaway or one thing that you're going to maybe double down on, do more of, or something new you're going to do? While you're typing those in the chat box, would love to connect with you further. You can reach me. Social media, LinkedIn's the best place to look me up, Chad Stenzel. Email is the best way to probably get a hold of me quickly. It's chad.stenzel@sandler.com. That's chad.stenzel@sandler.com. Thank you, Christine. Also, a couple of giveaways we've got going on right now. You can download for free 12 months of access to part of our online sales learning management system that we operate. If you go to www.ftt.sandler.com/sell, S-E-L-L, you can download it there. Also, we now have a mobile app with all of our material on it, and it's free and open through the end of June. So you've got to you have to first go to Sandler Online, that place I sent you, and start your account there, which again is free, doesn't cost you anything. You don't need a credit card or anything. And then once you have that, you'll be able to download from Google or iPhone. You'll be able to download the My Sandler app. It's all voice activated, and it's got coaching, management, sales, customer service material built in. You can listen to it while you're driving. It's also built in with Alexa. So if you're an Alexa person, everything is voice activated with Alexa. You can ask Alexa to go to all different, ask Alexa, how should I be asking for referrals? She'll take you right there in the My Sandler app. So I would encourage you to take advantage of those things. And I want to thank you very much for the time and attention. John, I appreciate, John says, be strategic with questions you asked. On the first engagement, qualify if we're right to do business with each other. Absolutely. Qualify, 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 now more than ever. Thank you so much. If you've got questions for me, if anything I can help you with, I'm happy to do that. Please reach out via email. I'm happy to share the slides with anybody who'd like them. And thanks very much. If I can do anything, happy to help. Everybody be well, and look forward to talking to you all soon and seeing you soon. Thanks.